Hello everyone. This is where I share real anonymous stories that I have had the opportunity to listen to and record. Each story is a lesson, a part of life that maybe one of us has experienced or is facing. If these confessions touch your emotions, I hope you can support me by subscribing to the channel, liking and sharing the video. That is really important and gives me more motivation to continue listening and telling other stories. Thank you very much everyone. And now please listen to today's story. I used to think that happiness was the simplest thing in the world. Just loving someone and that person loving me back was enough. I met her when we were both young, when we had nothing but dreams and the innocence of youth. She smiled a lot, her smile like the morning sun always made me feel calm. Perhaps at that time I believed that someone like that could never hurt me. We met through a group of mutual friends. At first, I didn't pay much attention to her because at that time I was also struggling with a new job. But then one day she sat back to listen to me talk about a project I was working on. Her eyes lit up as if what I said was really interesting. I thought, it turns out there is someone who really wants to hear me talk. And I fell in love with her from simple things like that. We got married after 3 years of dating. The wedding was small with only close friends and family. But I never felt like I was missing anything. She stood beside me in her pure white wedding dress, smiling like a child, and I thought, I must be the luckiest man in the world. The first years of our marriage were really beautiful. We worked hard, cooked together in the evenings and talked about random things but happily. She often left things everywhere and I always had to remind her. But instead of being annoyed, I saw that as part of what made our life more interesting. She was not good at cooking, but she always tried her best when there was a special occasion. Once, she ruined a pot of soup, but seeing her embarrassed and then burst out laughing, I could only hug her. We also had long trips, evenings sitting on the balcony listening to music, and moments of silence without feeling uncomfortable. Everything seemed stable and unshakable. I used to believe that. But was it because of that overconfidence that I didn't notice the small cracks that gradually appeared? I still wonder, was it because I was so sure of our love that I forgot that everything needed to be nurtured every day? Or was it simply that the happiness at that time was never truly lasting, I just saw it through rose-colored glasses? Perhaps the answer is no longer important. But if someone asks me were those years worth remembering, I would say yes. Because at least during that time, I loved and was loved in a way that I thought would last forever. That's why when the first signs of change appeared, I couldn't recognize them, or I chose not to see them. But then, the little things that I used to think were random or due to circumstances began to repeat themselves, more densely. I was no longer the center of her world like in the early years. I know that over time, everyone changes in marriage, but why do I keep feeling that the distance between us is no longer simply busyness or tiredness? It is like an invisible wall built very cleverly, and I don't know when I started standing on this side. Our conversations gradually became shorter, sometimes even just mechanical questions and answers. I remember one day after work I was eager to go home just to tell her a funny story in the company. But when I finished speaking she just nodded slightly, not asking anything more. Her eyes at that time seemed to be looking somewhere else, not the small kitchen with the smell of sour soup and the rattling sound of the fan. I found myself becoming a familiar habit to the point of fading in her eyes. Like an old chair that people used to sit on, but no longer recognized its existence. Sometimes I blamed myself for letting things become quiet for too long, without the surprises or excitement of the beginning. But then I consoled myself that all marriages are like that. We started having evenings where we lay back to back. Not because we were angry but simply because we didn't know what to say. I tried to hold her hand as a way to pull her closer to me. But those hands, although still warm, no longer tightened. Like a loose string, no matter how hard I tried to tie it, I couldn't hold on to what had passed. There were weekends when she said she had to go out. At first, I didn't think much of it because she had always been an active person with many friends. But gradually those outings lasted longer, the calls became stranger. I tried asking a few questions but she always answered with a slight smile, then changed the subject. A feeling of unease began to creep into me, like a persistent drizzle in the middle of winter. I didn't know what I was worried about or if I was just imagining all sorts of things. But I remember very clearly one afternoon, when she came home later than usual, the scent of strange perfume lingering on her collar, and I sat up all evening, unable to sleep. I wondered, was all the things I was feeling just because I was too sensitive? Or was I right in thinking that something was quietly changing between us? When I started to feel afraid of my own questions, that was also when I knew I couldn't continue to pretend that nothing was happening. One day when I walked into the living room, I saw her hastily hide her phone under the pillow. It was a very quick moment, but it was as sharp as a knife cutting into my heart. She smiled, saying it was just a text from her best friend, but I felt like I had missed something important. And for the first time I found myself wanting to check that phone. I didn't do it that day. I didn't want to turn myself into a man who was suspicious and controlling of his wife. But those thoughts kept repeating in my head. I started to pay more attention. The time she answered the phone in the bathroom took longer, or she stepped out onto the balcony to answer the phone. Her eyes, sometimes dreamy and distant, were far different from the smiling girl I used to be. I tried talking to her, telling her that I felt we were distant. She told me I was thinking too much, that she was just stressed out because of work. I believed it, or told myself that I had to believe it. But my intuition wouldn't let me rest easy. I started checking the little details. From strange bills in her wallet, small gifts that no one explained, to sudden meetings without a reason. Every time I discovered something, my heart felt like someone was squeezing it. There were nights when I lay still, staring at the ceiling, wondering, what the hell am I doing? Am I torturing myself with crazy thoughts? But then a text message in the middle of the night, a hasty glance from her, pushed me back to my original state of doubt. I knew I was about to enter a world that I might never want to return to. But the truth, no matter how cruel, I still wanted to face it. Because there is nothing more terrible than being deceived without knowing that you are the one being deceived. I began to feel like I was living two lives at once. One was a husband trying to keep his life as normal as if nothing had happened. The other was a man silently searching for the fragments of a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Every time I looked at her, I wondered, does she still love me? Or is it all just a facade that I naively believed in? I didn't know where I got the courage, but I finally decided to check her phone one evening when she was fast asleep. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, my heart pounding like it was about to explode out of my chest. And then I saw the messages. Short but enough to squeeze my heart. Miss you, when will we meet again? You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Not to me. Not me. I put the phone down, feeling like I was falling into a bottomless pit. That feeling of loss was like standing on the edge of a cliff. Just a light wind was enough to push me down. I didn't cry right away, didn't scream like in the movies. I just sat there, silent, like a stone statue, no longer feeling. The next morning, I pretended not to know anything. I still made her a cup of coffee like every day. She took it, smiled, and thanked me. That smile, how could it be so natural? I wondered who was the woman in front of me. And did I really know her? In the following days, I started to pay more attention. I checked everything: credit card bills, call history, even asked a few friends I trusted. An old friend, accidentally or intentionally, told me that he had seen her with a strange man in a coffee shop across the city. They looked very close. That sentence was like a punch in the middle of my chest, making me suffocate. I started following her. I never thought I would, but I did. One afternoon, she said she had a late meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. I followed her quietly from a distance. She didn't come to the company as she said. She turned into a small cafe, where warm yellow light poured out from the window. And then that man appeared. He pulled out a chair for her, touched her shoulder gently but intimately. I stood still looking through the glass, my heart aching like a knife. I turned away before they could see me. I don't know how long I was gone, only that when I got home my limbs were limp and my heart was empty. That night, I lay in bed, listening to her steady breathing beside me. I wanted to ask her everything right then, wanted to pull her up and make her answer. But then I fell silent. I wasn't ready. Maybe I still hoped this was just a misunderstanding, a nightmare that I would wake up from the next morning and everything would be as peaceful as before. But deep down I knew. I had stepped onto a path with no return. The next morning, I didn't look at her the same way. Every move I made was slow, as if I was afraid that if I moved too much, this little world would shatter right before my eyes. But the truth was, it had been shattered for a long time, I just didn't have the courage to admit it. I spent the whole day in a familiar coffee shop, scrolling through old photos, old text messages, wondering when everything started to change. It was the feeling of someone watching themselves die little by little, still trying to salvage what was left. Then the afternoon came. She said she would be late because of an urgent meeting. I didn't say anything, just nodded and looked at my watch. At that time, I was outside a small hotel where, according to the information I had, they often met. I wasn't sure what I was doing there. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave as if nothing had happened, but my feet felt nailed to the cold ground. I saw her walk in. The man was already waiting in the lobby. They didn't look back or forth, didn't hesitate for a second. They got into the elevator together, and I watched them like someone standing outside a movie I didn't want to be a part of. I stood there for a long time in silence. All the sounds around me seemed to be drowned out by a thick layer of water. I could hear my heart pounding beat by beat. I left the hotel as quietly as I had arrived. I don't know how I managed to walk home, shower, and then lie down on the bed as if nothing had happened. But I did, like a machine living by inertia. The next morning, I printed out the pictures I'd taken from afar that day. My hands were shaking as I looked at them, but I knew what I had to do. At night, I put them on the table, waiting for her to come home. She walked into the house, smiling as usual, put down her bag, asked me about dinner. I didn't answer, just looked at her for a long time until her eyes began to waver. Then I pushed the photo album towards her. Silence. A long space with only the ticking of the clock echoing in the room. She picked them up, each photo, her eyes opened wide and then closed. The first tears rolled down, not mine. She cried. I don't know if it was because of shame, fear, or because she was discovered. But for me, those tears no longer made my heart flutter. I asked her why. Why did she betray me? Why did she choose this path without telling me a word? She collapsed on the chair, covering her face, choking. The answer was unclear, just broken sentences. I don't know. I feel lost. I need someone to understand me better. I was wrong. Those words were like blunt blades cutting into an open wound. I sat there, listening to everything without interrupting, without blaming. I just wanted to hear everything, to make sure I didn't miss anything. That night, we didn't sleep. She cried, I was silent. Part of me wanted to scream, to smash things, to be angry. But the bigger part felt tired and empty. That feeling was like when you know your boat has been running low for a long time, but you keep rowing only to realize you've sunk into despair. Perhaps, that moment was when I truly touched the deepest bottom of human emotions. The days after our first encounter were a series of times when I didn't know if I was living or just existing. She asked me for a chance to explain more, to be more clear about what had happened. But honestly, at that time I was no longer interested in listening to anything. Everything she said, every explanation, whether truth or excuse, became endless noise to me. I no longer believed in anything. One evening, when the house was dark, only the dim light from the night light was shining on the pale wall, she sat next to me, her hand tightly holding a glass of water, her voice hoarse. Do you want to know everything? I will tell you the truth, everything. I sat still for a long time. Then I nodded. I didn't know if I really wanted to listen, but I knew if I didn't listen I would never sleep well. She told me about the days when I felt like I was just a shadow in her life, when work took me too far and I was no longer the one to listen to her like before. She said she was lonely, that she needed someone to talk to be cared for, and that man came along at that moment. I sneered inwardly. Who isn't lonely? But I didn't betray her? Why did she choose such an easy way to escape her loneliness? I listened silently, feeling like I was being pushed deeper into a bottomless pit of emotions. She cried the whole time she told the story, her voice faltering, her hands shaking. I can't say I didn't feel sorry, but that feeling was now mixed with callousness. Like a piece of cloth soaked in water for too long, no longer feeling soft or warm. Finally, she asked me to forgive her. A sentence that sounded so light but weighed on my chest like a rock. Forgive? Could I do it? Do I want to do it? And if I forgive, what guarantees that this rift will heal, that the broken trust can be rebuilt from scratch? We were silent. In the days that followed, neither of us said another word to the other. She still did the normal things that husband and wife do for each other. Cooking, washing clothes, asking about health. But everything was just automatic, without emotion, without warmth. One night, when I was sitting alone in my office, she walked in. She knelt down in front of me. I found it pathetic, so unlike her. The strong woman, who had once made me admire her independence, now bowed her head to my knee, saying words of apology over and over. I lifted her up, not because I was soft-hearted, but because I couldn't bear the sight of her. I told her to sit down, and for the first time since I discovered everything, I said frankly what I thought, what I felt. I talked about the disappointment, the loss, the deep wound she left behind. I didn't scream, I didn't curse. I just spoke as if each word was a stroke carved into the cracked wall of this marriage. Finally, I asked her what did she want. She said she just wanted me to forgive. That's all. But how could forgiveness be that simple? Forgiveness is not something that happens overnight, and especially not when the person who was hurt still doesn't know if he or she can heal. I told her I need time. And she nodded. We didn't say anything more. I saw her thinner, paler than before, but I didn't know if I was still heartbroken by it. And I wondered, has anyone ever experienced this feeling? The feeling of wanting to let go of everything, but then not knowing where to go, what to do. If you've ever been like me, you'll understand those questions never have easy answers. After that night, I began to realize another truth. Not everyone can forgive immediately, and not all wounds can heal on their own. Every morning when I woke up, I felt like I was carrying a heavy rock on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I looked around the house. Every item, every wedding photo hanging on the wall, all of them were like evidence reminding me that the love of the past was now just a memory. There were nights when I lay awake not because of any deep thoughts, just because I couldn't sleep. My eyes looked at the ceiling, my ears heard the ticking of the clock, and my mind was as empty as an empty box echoing a monotonous sound. She lay beside me, still breathing evenly, but the distance between us was now farther than any ocean I had ever known. I no longer wanted to talk to anyone, not even close friends. There were a few times when they called to invite me to have coffee. I refused. I didn't want to tell anyone about this. I felt ashamed, not because I was a victim, but because I didn't know what to do with my pain. It was like standing in front of a big fire, knowing I would be burned but still not daring to leave. One day I drove around the streets without a destination in mind. I stopped at a deserted park, sat on a bench all afternoon just to watch children playing and old people walking leisurely. I wondered how long would it be before I could be as calm as them. How long would it be before I could sit next to someone without fear of being deceived again? Dinners became quiet and boring. She tried hard, I knew. The dishes she cooked were more elaborate, the way she set the table was more careful, but all of that just made me feel strange. As if I was living with a stranger in my own house. One night I woke up from a nightmare. I found myself standing in the middle of the ocean, alone, with no one around. The waves were crashing, cold, and I knew I was about to sink. I jumped up, sweat soaking my back, gasping for breath as if I had just escaped drowning. And then I realized it wasn't just a dream. It was me, it was the real feeling I was living every day. She sat next to me, her hand gently touching my shoulder, asking if I was okay. I shook my head. It's okay, I answered like a machine. But in fact, everything was wrong. Me, her, this thing called marriage, everything was sinking. Sometimes I thought about leaving. Packing up, leaving this house, starting over somewhere strange. But then I sat still. Not because I still loved her, but because I was tired. Too tired to start over, too tired to break up, too tired to do anything but sit there and let time decide for me. I used to think I was strong. I used to think I could overcome anything. But there are wounds that don't bleed but burn, and those wounds are the ones that wear you down. I began to realize that the pain is not just about being betrayed, but the feeling that you have lost a part of yourself that you may never get back. If you have ever experienced a similar pain, perhaps you will understand me. You will know the feeling of waking up every morning, looking in the mirror and asking yourself, who am I? What do I have left after all this? And perhaps, like me, you have not found the answer. One morning when I woke up, the sunlight shining through the curtains, I suddenly realized something. I can't just sit here waiting for some miracle to happen so that this life can return to the way it was before. I know that even if I could turn back time, I wouldn't be able to change what happened. And no one can help me decide my future except myself. I thought a lot about leaving this house. There were times when I was ready to pack up everything, buy a plane ticket to a faraway place, where no one knew who I was, no one cared what I had been. But every time I stepped out the door, I hesitated. Maybe because I was afraid of the loneliness that I was not used to facing. Or maybe I was afraid that when I left, I would completely lose a part of my life that I had once believed in completely. We sat down many times to talk about the future. Those conversations were no longer filled with tears like before, but calmer, somewhat cold. She said that she was willing to do anything for me to forgive her, for me to trust her again. But I don't know if I want that anymore. Can trust, once broken, be repaired? Or is it just trying to patch up the pieces that can't be put back together? I once told her that I needed some time alone, not because I hated her, but because I needed to understand what I wanted. She agreed. And so I left that house, temporarily living in a small apartment not far from the old place. I needed distance to think, to breathe alone. During the days of living alone, I learned to listen to myself more. I spent a lot of time reading books, walking in the park, and sometimes simply sitting watching the cars passing by on the street. I realized that I had lost myself a long time ago, not just because she betrayed me, but because I had lived without knowing what my true feelings and desires were. One afternoon, I received a text message from her. Just a short line, "How are you?" I read it over and over again, then put the phone down without replying. Not because I was cold, but because I was not ready to enter that conversation. I needed time to be sure with myself before I could be sure with anyone else. I also tried to imagine life without her by my side. It would probably be lonely, empty, but it could also be more peaceful. And if I chose to forgive, then maybe we could start over, but I also knew clearly that it would be a very long road, with many challenges that not everyone could overcome. Finally, I decided to go back to the old house, not to immediately reconnect, but to make a final choice with her for us. I told her that I was not sure I could love her like before, but I was willing to give it one last try, on the condition that she really changed and we would go to a marriage counselor together. She agreed, her eyes moist but brighter than the last time I saw them. Perhaps, it was the first ray of hope after long dark days. But I knew every decision has its price. And this time I was willing to pay the price as long as I no longer had to live in silence and despair. As time went on, I began to focus more on myself. The sessions with the marriage counselor weren't always pleasant, and there were times when we sat in silence for hours without anyone speaking. But at least we were there, together. And that, the counselor said, was a start. I learned to listen not just to what she was saying but to my own feelings. One time, I heard myself sigh right in the middle of someone trying to say something positive. I realized that I had never paid attention to how I was feeling. It was a bit of a shock, but it was also the first step to healing. I started jogging every morning. The heavy steps at first gradually became lighter. I felt each breath, felt my body again. It's been a long time since I felt like I really existed, not just a shadow in that house. She's changed too. I don't know if it's because of me or because she's reached her limit. But I see patience in every gesture of hers, see the silence that used to be avoidance, now listening. She asks me what I want for the weekend instead of deciding for myself like before. Little things like that, to me, mean a lot more than apologies. We go together to places that used to be beautiful memories. The small coffee shop on the corner where I proposed to her, the park where we sat all afternoon just counting the fallen leaves. Everything is no longer the same as before, but at least, we have the opportunity to remind each other that there were days like that. I also learned to forgive myself. No longer blame myself for not recognizing the signs sooner, no longer torment myself for falling blindly in love. I accept that I am human and humans are vulnerable. But the important thing is I am still living and trying to move on little by little. One day, I watched her cooking in the kitchen, and suddenly realized that my eyes were no longer as bitter as before. I'm not sure if it was love like before, but at least it was no longer hatred. And for me that was enough for a new beginning. Sleep also came easier. I no longer stayed up all night, no longer startled by old memories. Maybe the scar is still there, but it is no longer painful. Like a healed wound, occasionally reminding me of an old lesson, but not making me fall down anymore. If someone asked me how do I know I have truly recovered, I would probably answer, the moment I look back at everything and no longer feel pain. There is only peace and a little gratitude that I have overcome it. Now, looking back at everything I've been through, I see that I'm no longer the person I was back then. I'm no longer the man who thought that love and trust were enough to keep someone. I've learned that love is not something that lasts forever without nurturing and understanding from both sides. I learned the first lesson: never take happiness for granted. I used to think that she would always be there by my side as a given. I forgot that even the strongest love can be eroded if not cared for every day. Neglect, even the smallest, can be the seed for a gap to gradually grow, then become an insurmountable chasm. The second lesson I realized is that no one is perfect, even the person you love the most. Everyone has weaknesses, moments of losing their way that they cannot control. Forgiving them is also forgiving yourself for trusting, for expecting. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness is learning to accept that scar as a part of your life. The third lesson is to listen and say what you really feel. Before, I often kept my feelings inside, thinking that silence would make things better. But that silence pushed us further apart. If I could share my fears, my sadness, and my expectations, maybe things would have been different. And if she had done the same, maybe she wouldn't have sought sympathy from someone else. The fourth lesson is that I understand that forgiveness is not to save a relationship, but to free myself. When I forgave her, I did it not for her but for me. So that I would no longer have to resent, no longer have to suffer because of a past that cannot be changed. Forgiveness is the journey I take for my own peace. And the last lesson, perhaps the most important: learn to love yourself before loving anyone else. I used to put her above myself, thinking that just making her happy was enough. But it turns out, if I don't love and take care of myself, I will have nothing left to give. I learned to spend time on my own hobbies, my own dreams and joys. So that even if someone walks out of my life, I still have myself left. Now, we are no longer husband and wife in the traditional sense. We are friends, people who once shared a part of our lives and now move on together, each in a different direction but no longer resentful. I wish her well and she wishes me peace. That is the best thing we can give each other after all that has happened. If you are in a similar situation, I just want you to know that every pain has an end. Whether that end is a reconciliation or a new beginning, it is up to you to decide. Don't be afraid of change, don't be afraid to let go if it makes you feel better. And always remember, loving yourself is never selfish. Thank you everyone for listening to this story to the end. If you feel that this story is meaningful or brings something to you, please leave a comment sharing your own story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and share so that I can continue to bring more stories. See you in the next videos.